On July 4th, a young man named Nolan Wells boarded a boat headed for Horn Island, Mississippi, with a group of friends. He never came back, and in the weeks that followed, the story of what happened on that island and what happened after the boats left has become one of the most contested and closely watched cases in the country, because the version of events the friend group offered from the beginning is now sitting in direct, documented tension with findings that no attorney statement and no social media post can simply explain away. The organization that spent days searching those waters just released a 24-page official investigation report. And what they found, or more precisely, what they could not find, changes everything about how this case needs to be understood going forward. If you are new here, this channel covers cases like this one with the full weight they deserve. Hit subscribe and leave a like on this video so DAV Crime Records can keep bringing you coverage that goes deeper than the headlines. Because this case demands exactly that. Horn Island sits off the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. It is uninhabited. It is accessible only by boat. It has no emergency services, no hospital, no infrastructure of any kind. What it does have are powerful, unpredictable currents, particularly at its northwestern tip, a stretch that search and rescue personnel have described, in their own words, as the washing machine. That description is not metaphorical. It reflects the physical reality of what those waters do to anything or anyone caught in them without warning. Nolan Wells arrived on Horn Island on July 4th aboard a boat called the Triton, along with a group of friends. The day unfolded the way July 4th on the Gulf Coast typically does: boats, crowds, open water, celebration. And then, at approximately 4:31 in the afternoon, the Triton departed Horn Island. The friend group's account, which has been publicly stated and legally represented since the beginning, was that Nolan chose to remain on the island voluntarily, that he was seen alive after both boats left, that he made a decision to stay behind. That account has now been examined by the United Cajun Navy, the volunteer search and rescue organization that knows those specific waters from direct operational experience, that spent days on and around Horn Island searching for Nolan, that examined the boats connected to this case, their movements, Nolan's documented whereabouts throughout the day, and every claim made about what happened after the Triton's departure. Their 24-page report reached a single, unambiguous conclusion. The United Cajun Navy found no credible evidence that Nolan Wells was alive after 4:31 p.m. Not ambiguous evidence, not conflicting evidence, no credible evidence of any kind. That conclusion carries weight that needs to be understood in context. This is not a finding from social media. It is not an interpretation offered by an anonymous online commentator. It comes from the organization whose representative personally described the current at the northwestern tip of Horn Island as the washing machine. It comes from an organization that offered cadaver dogs to search the boat involved in this case. The United Cajun Navy has operational credibility in those specific waters that is simply not replicable from a press conference podium or a comment section. And their report says, no credible evidence of life after 4:31. Now, the details of what the report actually examined matter just as much as the headline conclusion. The report reviewed every piece of evidence that had been offered to support the claim that Nolan remained alive on Horn Island after the Triton departed. And when it came to that specific question, what evidence exists that Nolan was seen alive after 4:31, the report identified exactly two things. The first was a photograph of a black man in blue shorts walking the beach among a group of white peers. The report identified this individual as not appearing to be Nolan Wells. The second was a second-hand account. Someone stated on social media that a passenger of theirs felt certain they saw Nolan Wells involved in a group that was fighting around 5 in the afternoon on Horn Island. They added that the Bertram boat with the blue top left shortly after. That is the complete evidentiary foundation that existed to support the claim Nolan was alive after 4:31. A photograph that does not appear to show him, and a second-hand account built on a passenger's impression. What happened to that 5 p.m. account after it entered the public record is more significant than the account itself. When asked whether the fight being described happened with others or among the group themselves, the person who posted the account responded that the 3 people on the boat who saw it all confirmed it was amongst themselves. That response added specificity to the claim, which gave it more traction in the public conversation. And then someone who was actually on the Bertram boat being referenced responded directly. In their own words, they wrote that the original poster was sadly mistaken. They stated clearly that it was a totally different kid who was present, that the person being described had no affiliation with Nolan Wells. And then they added a detail that connects directly to a separate thread running through this case. They stated that when they spoke to the boys in that area, one of them had an entire vodka bottle in his hand. That is not a vague disagreement about a distant observation. That is a person who was physically present at the specific location and moment being described, saying directly and specifically that the sighting involved a completely different individual. The 5 p.m. account that had been circulating as evidence Nolan was alive after the Triton left has now been directly contradicted by someone with first-hand knowledge of that exact moment. That contradiction creates a very specific problem for what attorney Russell Latino stated publicly on behalf of his client Edmonston. Latino claimed that at least 2 credible witnesses saw Nolan Wells alive on Horn Island approximately 1.5 hours after both boats had departed. That claim, if accurate, would represent the most significant direct challenge to the United Cajun Navy's finding. If 2 credible witnesses genuinely saw Nolan after 4:31, then the report's conclusion requires a serious reassessment. But those 2 claims cannot both be fully accurate at the same time. Either the witnesses Latino referenced did see Nolan after 4:31, and the report failed to account for that evidence, or those witnesses were describing someone other than Nolan. In precisely the same way the person on the Bertram boat said the 5 p.m. sighting was describing a totally different kid. The grand jury currently examining this case will have access to information that neither the report nor Latino's public statements can fully provide on their own. They will have the complete United Cajun Navy report. They will have whatever the witnesses Latino referenced actually told investigators, not what was described in a press conference, but what was said under circumstances where accuracy carries legal consequence. They will have GPS data, phone records, and footage from that afternoon. Their determination about whether Nolan Wells was alive after 4:31 will be based on the complete evidentiary picture. And then, in the same week that report was released, something else happened. Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, Morgan Seymour, and other members of the friend group launched a fundraising campaign that reached $150,000 in donations. The campaign stated that since Nolan's death, these young men had been subjected to death threats and threats of violence. It noted that most of them could not attend their own best friend's funeral because of safety concerns. It described them as young men who cooperated with authorities, turned over all information available to them, and provided an overwhelming number of witnesses to account for their whereabouts. Those safety concerns are not fabricated. 2 federal arrests have been made for threats directed at people connected to the friend group's families. That is documented. What is generating the sharpest public reaction is not the existence of the campaign. It is the timing. A 24-page investigation report concluding there is no credible evidence Nolan Wells was alive after the boat left, and a fundraising campaign from the friend group seeking financial support landed in the same week. Those 2 realities arriving simultaneously is what has fractured the public conversation around this case into something that is becoming increasingly difficult to bridge. Nolan Wells's family is still waiting for answers. The grand jury is still working, and the question of what happened after 4:31 p.m. on Horn Island on July 4th remains, for now, unanswered. The reaction to the fundraising campaign did not emerge from nowhere. It emerged from a specific and documentable gap, the gap between how the friend group described Nolan Wells on that page and what the United Cajun Navy's 24-page investigation report concluded about the last confirmed moments of his life. The page described him as their best friend and their brother. The report found no credible evidence he was alive after the boat they arrived on departed at 4:31 p.m. Those two framings exist in the same public record simultaneously, and the distance between them is where the sharpest public reaction to this case is currently living. That tension is real, it is documented, and it matters analytically beyond the emotional charge it has generated, because what the fundraising page actually confirms, separate from the controversy surrounding it, carries its own evidentiary significance. Warren Hudson is named on that page. Jax Patalo is named. Morgan Seymour is named. These are specific, publicly identified members of the friend group connected by name to the campaign's central claim that they provided an overwhelming number of witnesses accounting for their whereabouts. That specific claim is either accurate and will be reflected in what the grand jury hears when it examines every witness account alongside every GPS record and every phone record, or it is a characterization that the evidence will not support when that examination occurs. A grand jury operating with subpoena power does not evaluate witness accounts based on volume. It evaluates them based on internal consistency and consistency with objective records that exist independently of what any person chose to say. Those records do not negotiate. They do not remember selectively. They simply reflect what happened, when it happened, and where. Now, there is a specific detail inside the United Cajun Navy report that deserves more careful attention than the headline conclusion alone can provide, and it connects directly to the broader visual timeline this case has been building since July 4th. The report identified a photograph of a black man in blue shorts walking the beach among a group of white peers as one of its only two pieces of evidence supporting the claim that Nolan was present on Horn Island after 4:31 p.m. The report's determination was that this individual does not appear to be Wells. That finding sits directly alongside a separate piece of visual evidence that entered this case earlier, a TMZ video recorded at 2:23 in the afternoon, showing a young man in trunks matching those Wells was photographed wearing earlier that day, on what has been identified as the Mac Daddy boat. Two photographs. Two different points in time, one identified as potentially showing Nolan at 2:23 in the afternoon, one identified as not appearing to show Nolan at some point after 4:31. The Mac Daddy boat footage, confirmed by metadata at 2:23 p.m., places someone matching Nolan's description on that vessel before the Triton's departure. The beach photograph in the United Cajun Navy report does not confirm his presence after that departure. Together, those two pieces of visual evidence create a photographic timeline that is entirely consistent with the report's central finding. Nolan was on that island before 4:31 p.m., and there is no credible photographic evidence placing him there after it. That absence of photographic evidence after 4:31 is a point that deserves more analytical weight than it has received in the public conversation. Horn Island on July 4th was not empty. It was not quiet. It was a major holiday weekend on the Gulf Coast, with hundreds of people present, most of them with phones in their hands, documenting the day in real time. Photographs, videos, Snapchat stories, Instagram posts, the kind of continuous, overlapping, user-generated documentation that a holiday crowd on a popular destination produces automatically and without coordination. If Nolan Wells chose to stay behind on that island after the Triton departed, he would have been a young man spending the remainder of a July 4th afternoon on a beach populated by hundreds of people actively recording everything around them. And yet no photograph, no video, no piece of user-generated content from the hours after 4:31 p.m. has been publicly confirmed to show him there. The viral photograph of Nolan that spread widely across social media after his death was from earlier in the day. After 4:31, the United Cajun Navy's 24-page investigation found nothing credible to place him on that island. That absence is not, on its own, proof of what happened to Nolan Wells. It is not a conclusion, but it is a specific and documentable forensic gap, and investigators with the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, who have received footage submitted from people who were on Horn Island that afternoon, are specifically positioned to either fill that gap or confirm it. What they have found in that footage has not been made public. But the question of whether any of it places Nolan somewhere specific after 4:31 is one of the most consequential, outstanding questions this investigation currently holds. With all of that established, here is precisely where this case stands after the United Cajun Navy report, the collapse of the 5 p.m. witness account, and the fundraising campaign all landed in the same week. What is confirmed? The United Cajun Navy found no credible evidence that Nolan Wells was alive after 4:31 p.m. The 5 p.m. witness account was directly and specifically challenged by a person on the actual boat being referenced, who stated it was a totally different individual with no affiliation to Nolan. The only two pieces of evidence the report could identify to support the claim Nolan remained on the island after the Triton departed were a photograph that does not appear to show him and a second-hand account that has since been directly contradicted. The friend group fundraising campaign has raised $150,000 and has simultaneously generated the strongest public reaction this case has produced since the tow call audio surfaced. What is claimed but not yet confirmed? The two credible witnesses that Edmonston's attorney Russell Latino referenced. Witnesses he stated saw Nolan approximately 1.5 hours after both boats left the island, have not been publicly identified by name. They have not spoken for themselves on the record. Their account, as described by Latino in a press conference setting, now sits in direct and irresolvable tension with the United Cajun Navy's finding of no credible evidence of life after 4:31. What remains completely unknown? What the sealed state autopsy actually found when the state's own examiners looked at Nolan's body, with the neck structures present and the lungs intact before dissection. What the toxicology results from both the independent and state examinations will show about his actual physical condition at the time of death. What the Life 360 location data shows about where Nolan's phone was during every moment of that afternoon. Whether any footage submitted to investigators by people who were on Horn Island that day places Nolan somewhere specific after 4:31 in a way the United Cajun Navy report was unable to confirm from its own examination. The joint phone inspection with FBI presence is still being coordinated. 5 platform subpoenas are still working through company response timelines. The grand jury process is still forming. The state autopsy remains sealed. Elmore Wells has described waking up every single morning to what he called the biggest challenge he has ever faced in his life. Christine Wells has been consistent since July 4th in one specific and public request, that anyone with information come forward, that demonstrations held in Nolan's name remain peaceful, and that the focus stay on finding out what happened to her son rather than on anything else this case has generated in the months since his body was recovered. That request deserves to be heard clearly, because underneath every investigative thread, every contested witness account, every conflicting attorney statement, every fundraising campaign, and every page of every report is one documented fact that does not change regardless of what any investigation ultimately concludes. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He left for Horn Island on the 4th of July with a group of people he knew. He did not come home. The United Cajun Navy report finding no credible evidence of life after 4:31 p.m. is not the final word on what happened to him, but it is a 24-page documented finding from an organization with direct operational experience on Horn Island and in those specific waters, concluding that the evidence offered to support the friend group's account of what happened after they left does not hold up to scrutiny. That finding is now in the public record. It will be part of what every investigator, every attorney, and every grand juror examining this case has access to, and it sits alongside the GPS data, the tow call audio, the independent autopsy findings, the sealed state report, and every piece of footage and phone record this investigation has accumulated since Nolan Wells disappeared from Horn Island. The answer to what happened to him is somewhere in the gap between 4:31 p.m. when GPS confirmed that boat left the island and the moment his body was found at the northwestern tip of Horn Island 2 days later. at the exact stretch of coastline that search and rescue personnel, from their own experience in those waters, have called the washing machine. His family deserves that answer, and this case is not finished producing them. If you have followed this coverage from the beginning, subscribe to DAV Crime Records and leave a like on this video. Every update on this case will come through this channel, and there is more coming. Stay with it.